extremely lucky to have Dr. John Ioannidis here today with us. He's a pioneer in the field of metascience, professor of medicine, epidemiology, and population health at Stanford, where he also leads the Meta Research Innovation Center. So, John, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'll try to share my slides. I'll try to share some thoughts on how meta research can reform research practices and where we stand at the moment. There's a lot of momentum and a lot of interesting initiatives happening in that space. I feel I'm learning new things every day, and I think that there's really a lot of great potential. To give you a bird's eye view of what science looks like in terms of its output, we have about 50 million people who publish scientific papers. Many of them are not just a one-time off. About 12 million have at least 5 full papers that they have published. We have about 200 million scholarly documents that are increasing at a rate of 7 to 8 million every year. And each paper nowadays sometimes may include material that is enough to outnumber thousands, if not millions, of papers in the past in terms of volume of information. In fact, when we look at science, this is a map of science that I have drawn with my colleague Kevin Boyack. There's just hundreds of thousands of scientific subdisciplines. Each dot in this map is a different subdiscipline, and how the scientific method is applied, research practices would vary substantially sometimes across this universe. What is acceptable, what is optimal, what is thought to be substandard, what is thought to be completely unacceptable may not be the same. In fact, that universe is a much smaller piece of a larger non-visible universe. You think of the physical universe as being comprised of ordinary matter and energy, but also dark matter and energy, where only the minority is the ordinary matter, about 5%, and most of what is out there is probably dark energy and even more dark matter and even more dark energy. We may think of the same way about the scientific footprint, that the literature that we see is highly selectively reported out of a vast sea of potential analysis and data sets and initiatives and ideas and possibilities that have been explored or partly explored, and also some forces that are not necessarily aligned with getting the most reliable results. There are some common trends across different fields. For example, one of them is that almost all the literature that uses statistical significance inference tools claims some statistically significant results. So statistical significance has lost its discriminating ability, at least at the level of p-values less than 0.05. This is some text mining exercise looking at the entire biomedical PubMed literature, abstracts, and also about 1 million full text articles until 2015. 96% of the biomedical literature claimed some statistically significant results when p-values were used. We have repeated that analysis recently. We're finalizing the paper. It's exactly the same, 96%, with some improvements meaning less significance in some specific scientific fields. At the same time, despite all that amazing success and significance, there's a lot of worrisome signals that much of that science is not disruptive, is not really moving the needle. It's not really leading to translational successes. There's different ways that have been proposed to measure disruption, and most of them agree that science, both in terms of papers and patents, is becoming less disruptive over time. So many people, I think currently, I would argue thousands, have argued and work on how to improve that pattern, how to improve the reproducibility. I think none of us, when we started, got a degree on metascience or meta research or reproducible science. I think we all started as scientists in specific fields that we realized that there's challenges and problems with methods, with transparency, with sharing, with replication, with inferences. And currently, there's thousands of people across very different fields who believe that we could do better, and there are ways to do better. And there's opportunities along the entire spectrum of how we do research in the typical way of generating, specifying hypotheses, designing studies, running these studies, collecting data, analyzing the data sets, testing hypotheses, interpreting results, publishing and conducting next experiments, and many ramifications and other paths that one may take across that cycle. There's both opportunities for biases and opportunities for doing things right or doing things better. And it's not just up to scientists who might try to do things better. It's also up to publishers and editors and funders and institutions and professional societies and the general public who does care or should care about more reliable science that could hopefully help do things better. Of course, many of these drawbacks and difficulties that we face may be weaponized, and you can have pushback that maybe we shouldn't be revealing many of the challenges that we meet because then we seem as if science is not so powerful. Well, science is powerful no matter what, but it is a human enterprise. It is difficult. It is noble. It does have challenges, and showing that we try to do better might be the best way to even avoid or fight back against weaponized challenges in science. There's a lot of discussion about reproducibility, geometrically increasing mention of reproducibility of results or reproducibility of various things in the literature. And along with Steve Goodman, we have tried to group reproducibility into three bins. Reproducibility of methods is the ability to look at the method section plus whatever supplements plus whatever links to data sets and code and be able to resurrect the research, make it work again, make the formulas work, make the code work, make the algorithm work. If data sets are available as well, run these codes on the data sets and get the same results as is being produced in the paper. Essential if anyone wants to use that again and to do another study or just to check the results of the study that has been published. Reproducibility of results means that we do another study or multiple studies, or we have multiple teams who try to do reproducibility checks that are trying to faithfully follow what was done in the first study. And that means that we need to have reproducible methods to start with, and then we get similar results. And the question is, what does similar results mean? What is congruent results? What is dissimilar results? What is reproducible? What is non-reproducible? There's different ways to look at that, and obviously one needs to ask what is the exact criteria that have been used. But we have tried in a different set, in a different study, in a different experiment. Reproducibility of inferences is the toughest of all. It means that several different people, perhaps with very good levels of expertise, and looking at the very same data from 1 or 2 or 10 or 1,000 studies, they try to make some sense out of that, and they may make different sense out of what they see. So the knowledge claims might not be of similar strength from the very same evidence in terms of what is available. How much can we improve that landscape? I think we have seen a lot of improvement in reproducibility of methods. Many fields have taken that very seriously and have really moved forth with leaps of improvement. But I think this is not necessarily in fields that produce many papers. There's many fields that just have very naive methods, very weak methods, and in a way, they can produce massively new papers on methods that are very weak, very non-transparent, non-shareable, non-reproducible. Reproducibility of results is also very heterogeneous. I think it remains unknown in many, perhaps most fields, and probably these are fields where replication is just not attempted at all. It is still considered to be me too. I think these fields are becoming fewer, but there's still many. And at the same time, of course, there's many fields that have started taking replication very seriously, either as a sine qua non, if they really need that to establish any sort of credibility, or at least checking in some sort of soul searching some of their research findings and trying to see what they can do if they try to reproduce them, either in single teams or in multi-lab teams. Reproducibility of inferences, as I said, is the toughest, and I would argue that maybe it's not even possible, maybe even not worthwhile to improve, because people will make different inferences based on the same data and the same kind of raw results. I think this is a bit unavoidable because people may have different perspectives, different priors, different priorities, but I think it's still important to have transparency and try to see why do people make different inferences? How do they explain the fact that they reach different inferences? It could be just that they have conflicts of interest, financial conflicts, or something that one should very seriously take into account, or maybe they have some very rational way of prioritizing some evidence versus some other evidence. We have currently a lot of information across very different fields where replications in a way have been done and have been incorporated into meta-analysis. Most of the studies, when they were published, they didn't really present themselves as replications, but the fact that they were included in meta-analysis means that someone thought that they pretty much look at fairly similar questions so that they can be seen in their totality. So we can look at the footprint of different biases within these meta-analyses. In medicine, for example, we have the Cochrane databases that cover almost all medicine at the moment. And this is an analysis where we used 67,000 plus meta-analysis. We also have collections in environmental science and psychology and economics. So we can study indirectly whether the pattern of results is commensurate with different types of bias, for example, publication selection bias. And we see that the results are really commensurate with that, with the likely effect sizes being much smaller compared to those that are presented on the average of these studies, and the proportion of significant results probably being too high compared to what the unbiased proportion of significant results should have been. In some cases, we can go into more depth and look at different sets of assumptions. For example, this is an exercise that we did in the economics literature. We found that about 45 to 75% of the statistically significant results should not have been statistically significant. And it's not easy to pinpoint which one study is really at fault, but you can get an average inference for the entire field. You can go into more depth and try to see whether the results of meta-analysis are congruent with very different types of biases. So, for example, in that evaluation, along with Dan Fanelli and Rodrigo Costas, we looked at about 250,000 studies and around 3,000 meta-analyses, and we tried to see whether the results are compatible with 18 different types of biases that, if present, they would be likely, on average, to give a specific type of footprint on what results we have available. And eventually, we do see that footprint across most fields for most of these biases, but some fields have more of one bias and some others have more of another. For example, small study effects, where small studies, the universe of small studies tends to give exaggerated results, is very prominent in the social sciences. It is pretty prominent in the biomedical sciences. It doesn't seem to be prominent in the physical sciences, where mostly they don't face the problem of small data sets. They have huge telescopes, they have CERN, zillions of data points. That small sample size is not their problem. For other types of biases, it may be the opposite. And I think that the microenvironment for each scientific field may also create different signatures of bias. In many of the reproducibility efforts, we have learned a lot, not just in terms of whether results replicate or not, but also how difficult it is to do some of these reproducibility exercises. The classic example that I want to share here is the cancer biology reproducibility project, where people started out to reproduce a number of experiments in highly cited papers, and about 2/3 of them did not get results that were congruent with the original result, which is a bit worrisome. But what is even more worrisome is that the intention was to reproduce 193 experiments from 53 papers, and eventually only 50 experiments from 23 papers could be reproduced, which means that about 3/4 of these results that had been published in high-profile journals and had been highly cited, they could not even be taken off the ground, even though the replicators tried to communicate with the original investigators, tried to get insights. How did you do that? That was not clear in the published methods. Can you explain? It was not possible. The other worrisome aspect that we have learned is that that replication effort, which seems so simple, something has been published, it should be there, we should just go to the lab, and a new student comes to the team and their supervisor says, well, just to get started, try to replicate that study that was published a few weeks ago in Nature. The method should be there. On average, that took 197 weeks to design the study, to try to find out how exactly it was done, to run the experiments, to run the analysis, and then publish. It was not really that it took so long to publish, because eLife was waiting to publish the results and had promised to publish the results. So if you think that a new postdoc or a new PhD student comes to the lab and they can spend 197 weeks just to replicate something that supposedly is done, deal, and already published in the literature in prestigious journals, then we are in serious trouble. People don't like to hear that sometimes. It's a message that is unsettling, and especially in an environment where science attacks can be weaponized. It's not nice to have to say that we have problems with reproducibility. It leads also to reputation wars sometimes. People feel that they're attacked, their reputation's at stake. I think we should all acknowledge that we can make mistakes, we can make errors. This is why we do science. We're not into dogma. We just try to correct our work. But this is not an easy message sometimes. And there is resistance to refutation. We have seen that across very different fields with meta-research evaluations in epidemiology, in clinical medicine, in psychology. The most thoroughly rebuked, let's say, or non-replicated results, things that 40 teams have not managed to see a signal. Well, I mean, could it be that the original one was correct? I don't know, maybe, but I mean, it's very unlikely if 40 teams have not seen that. Or in medicine, 6 mega trials have shown absolutely no signal that beta-carotene is the most effective chemoprevention for cancer, as it was published in a Nature paper early on. Again, there's no higher level of documentation that we can reach. People continue citing the original work, and they continue citing the original principles and narratives and inferences. They either ignore their application failures or they just dismiss them as we don't care about them, we just continue. So I think if we just wait for replication to save the day, it may be a bit too late, and we have to focus more on getting more efficiency and more credibility early on how we design research and how we design research agendas, rather than just try to get rid of non-reproducible results pretty late in the process. There's many ways that this can be done. Here's a number of interventions that have been shown in different settings to improve reproducibility. Along with Tamarinda Haven, we published recently a review in Annual Review of Medicine. They include design and contact issues, which I like the most because they happen early. So pre-registration, register reports, systematic reviews, and other evidence synthesis before doing a new study, electronic lab notebooks, critical incidence reporting, multi-team, multi-center studies, upfront reproducibility training. Then we have reporting on how to report research. You can go to the Equator website where we have hundreds of guidelines on reporting, open and fair data, open access, open code, open methods and protocols, and then reviewing, trying to correct errors through reviewing. And that could include training, statistical reviewing, open peer review, and post-publication peer review. Most of these approaches are difficult to say whether they would be generalizable, and also it's difficult to say how far they can reach. Is there a ceiling? For example, I'm a fervent supporter of sharing data, but along with Tom Hardwick for a number of years now, we have built this data arc project where we go to the authors of the most highly cited papers in each scientific field, and we say, please give us the data at no cost. We will curate them, make them available for other scientists to use. You have published some of the most amazing work in the history of your field, and it's important to salvage that legacy. Well, most of them do not share their data. Some of them have already shared their data sets. A few more do send their data sets, but most do not. And it's not that they do not want to. For example, when you look at the key reasons in psychology and psychiatry, top cited papers, the most common reason that it's outside of my control. The PI has no control of the data sets that the paper carries their name. Probably they have never seen the data set. Maybe it was generated in some company, and maybe some company statisticians analyzed the data, but they never saw that data set. I hope they did see the manuscript that has their name. Journals ask for data sharing statements. So for many years, if you want to publish in a medical journal, you need to put a data sharing statement on what you're going to do and how are you going to share. Well, you might say, I'm not going to share. Some journals are not accepting this. So PLOS Medicine and BMJ are not accepting that option. There are data sharing statements when we looked at the 3 top medical journals, JAMA, Lancet, and New England Journal of Medicine, but only about half of them say that they will make individual level data available. And then if you want information on where is that going to be, what repository, it's about 20%. When it's going to be IPD, individual participant data repository, that's very few, less than 5%. And if you want the data sets tonight, it's only going to be 2 out of 500. We have repeated that exercise. That paper we published 4 years ago. We repeated it recently. It's not 2 out of 500. It's like 6 out of 500. So a little bit better, but not much. BMJ and PLOS One, as I said, you need to make data sets readily available as a precondition to publication. So we did reach out to authors who published clinical trials there and said, we want to audit the data sets and rerun the analysis. And about half of them, 46%, did send us the data sets, and we rerun the analysis. We got the same result as had been published. So in an environment of sharing and let's say trust, where people are willing to share, I think we can have trust that what we see is really what these people got. Now, could it be possible that what they sent is fake data and it is aligned to what they published? Yes, but I don't want to become paranoid. I think I want to take it as real that it is so. And many other fields have made sharing the default. For example, genomics has seen a lot of data sharing, and according to that paper that we published in Science 6 years ago, we all agreed that that should be the default, that everything should be shared. If you get public funding in particular, there's no reason why. You have to explain if someone does not want to share everything, even before utilizing that information to publish a piecemeal type of publication based on very limited data sets. The best way to make sense is just to get all the data sets together in public view, analyze them together, and give credit to everyone who has contributed. And if you look across the entire biomedical literature, we do see progress over time. Data sharing has increased from less than 1% in 2000 to about 20-25% of currently published papers sharing their raw data sets. Code sharing has gone from less than 1% to about 7%, protocol registration a little bit better, and there's more replication happening, and more people at least are willing to acknowledge that they perform a replication. Of course, most are still saying that they have something novel to say rather than replicating. And we do have more transparency and disclosures of conflicts and funding, although we cannot, of course, be sure that people do report all the conflicts and all the funding that they have received. There's a lot of heterogeneity across scientific disciplines. If you look for color for these research practices, you see that we have an advent of open access, which means that you have a PDF that you can access, and most of the time you have to pay lots of money as an author to do this. I feel like an idiot because I have tried to promote open science, and unfortunately the most successful part has just been that you have to pay thousands of dollars to publish your work in open access journals. But you see color also for data sharing. You see some color for code sharing, some color for protocol registration. Unfortunately, if you want data sharing plus code sharing plus protocol registration, this is very rare still, because fields that are registering their protocols are not usually those that share also data sets and code, and vice versa. There are also randomized trials that have been done as part of the meta research agenda, trying to see whether different aspects of scientific research can be improved. For example, quality of peer review. This is a systematic review by Isabelle Boutron's team in Paris, and there are things that in randomized trials seem to work. For example, having a statistical peer reviewer does seem to work. It improves the quality of papers. It has been seen in randomized experiments. The problem is, where are we going to find statistical reviewers to review 7 or 8 million papers that are published every year? Could AI do that? Could there be some automation component? Reviewers are over fatigued. Statistical reviewers are even fewer. How about correcting the record after the fact? Most journals do not even know what that means. When we looked at the top 10 journals across each scientific discipline, we saw that actually medicine, which we thought would be horrible because in our experience, there's very little correction happening in medicine. Actually, medicine had more options compared to almost any other field. And most fields in science had no option in their journal pages to correct or to critique or to challenge what has been published. Of course, there's other platforms. There's PubPeer. There's other opportunities for post-publication review, but I think we need more and better post-publication review. PubPeer comments, for example, are wonderful much of the time, but there's also lots of junk there. Of course, I don't think we can put a restriction. People can just post what they want, and hopefully we will see the best comments and the most meaningful comments vindicated at the end of the day. But the question is, what is the end of the day, and how soon, and how quickly can we correct the scientific record? There's a lot of research going on at the moment on peer review and publication modes and different models. We had our international congress a couple of months ago, in Chicago. Wonderful presentations from lots of people, lots of new ideas coming from fields that perhaps most of us had not been accustomed to hear. So fascinating work coming from computer science, from engineering, from some of the new tools that offer new challenges and new opportunities. And eventually, we all want to get to reliable research, and we want to see titles like this: high replicability of newly discovered social behavioral findings is achievable. And you read that paper, you see that close to 100% of these studies could be replicable. And this is a paper by amazing scientists, very knowledgeable, both in their fields and in meta research. Minor problem: the paper was retracted. Why? Because it claimed that pre-registration is really what works, but actually the paper itself had not been pre-registered. In fact, the work that had been promised to be done was very different to what was presented eventually in this report. So now it is being reanalyzed, and hopefully it will be republished with a more appropriate angle of view of what was done. At the same time that we're struggling to improve research, we have a challenge that research funding is being curtailed in multiple countries around the world. There's pressure to cut funds, and I think this is very unfortunate because it is just increasing competition. It is increasing incentives for people to do the wrong thing in order to survive in that ecosystem. And I think we need to look very carefully on how we can have more efficient ways of rewarding research. This is one such effort that we published a few months ago in PNAS, trying to look at the cost of competition in distributing what are becoming scarce and scarcer research funds. Unfortunately, in many of our funding systems, in a way, we spend so much money to write the proposals, to edit them, to polish them, to get them reviewed, to get them administered, to get it audited, to get it regulated, to compliance, and so forth, that in a way, the funding is working as a way to channel funding into that machinery rather than channel funding into running research itself. For those who are interested to join our efforts at Metrics, please join us on Thursdays on our international forum seminars, and please do reach out anytime if you want to collaborate, if you have some ideas. I love to hear from people who work in different aspects of meta research and meta science. I'm learning new things every day. The field is really, really exploding in terms of talent and innovation and ideas. Not all of these ideas are going to work. Actually, if we have the same success rate as other scientific fields that are bold and innovative, probably only a slice of these ideas are going to work. But still, I think it's fascinating to brainstorm about them. To conclude, we are dealing with very complex human phenomena when we try to do science. And the scientific method is applied in very different variations. There's no perfectly right and perfectly wrong on how to apply it. The discussion surrounding how to improve science and research practice has been intense. Some commentators are not always well-intentioned and selfless, and I think that weaponization is happening, unfortunately, more frequently. Meta-research offers a scientific approach to studying and improving research practice, and I think it needs to be strengthened and critiqued also in terms of how things are run. There may be even a ceiling on how reproducible and useful research can be. Perfection is unattainable, but improvements are possible. And all these reproducibility indicators that I mentioned, like data sharing and code sharing and registration, they're surrogates. We don't do those just for the sake of sharing data. We do it because we want to discover, because we want to translate, because we want to save lives in medicine. What matters in research science and its positive impact is more complex, but we can hopefully use these surrogates in a positive way. Thank you so much, and I don't know if we have time for questions.
I think we've got time for one question.
Thank you. Hi, John. Thank you for this excellent talk. Really fun, and I learned a lot. So I think what you're talking about matters in all fields of science, but if you look at maximum harm to society from what you describe, it's probably in highly politicized fields and data, scientific consensus that's being manufactured to support political opinions, which seems to me has increasingly been happening. So how can we tackle that inference, conflict of interest, sometimes hidden in think tank funding that ultimately funds highly misleading studies that may be statistically fine. But for example, I recently read on the school closures in the pandemic that all the teachers worked excessive hours, and all these studies are quoted as scientific consensus, but are taken from self-reporting from the teachers, right? So there's no objective data in any of these, but then the newspapers uncritically quote these and say everything is statistically significant, which it is, but the problem is the source data. So how can we tackle that?
That's an important question. And as I showed, we have seen improvement in reporting of conflicts of interest and of funding and this type of disclosures. But we cannot be certain that they're complete. And in my experience, I've seen many situations where when we looked in more depth, we saw that there's a lot of undisclosed conflicts. For example, we looked at a Nature paper that had one reported conflict out of about 200 that we discovered based on a very superficial search, just on publicly available documents, and I'm sure that if one were to look more deeply, probably there would be thousands of undisclosed conflicts. I think this is becoming more common, and I think that many journals are resisting correction because they say, oh, it's okay. I mean, now the paper is published. Do you have some critique about the numbers? But, this is sometimes not papers about numbers. There may be guidelines. They may be kind of consensus papers. They may be things that are running an agenda. Recently we had a paper retracted that had been published in 2000 that was practically revealed to have been funded by Monsanto and probably even written by Monsanto authors without the real authors being the authors, and concluding, of course, in favor of Monsanto products. And, that pretty much fueled guidelines and conclusions and policy and regulations for 25 years until it was retracted pretty recently. So we see a lot of that. I can only argue that more transparency is good, and we need more of that. I think that there's many ways that science may be influenced not just by financial conflicts, but also by ideological conflicts. Unfortunately, we see a lot of political conflicts interfering into research nowadays. We've run an analysis with Jeroen Bas looking at the transformation of the scientific literature. 20 years ago, almost everything was published by countries that were democracies. Currently, only about 20% of the scientific literature is published by countries that are full democracies, and only 8% is published by countries that have full freedom of the press. So can we trust that? I don't want to say don't trust science, but I really worry that for many sensitive topics, there will be lots of hidden layers of conflicts, and I don't want to become paranoid, but we have to think about how much of that is trustworthy, and depending on what it says and where it comes from, I may sometimes be paranoid, and deservedly so.
Okay, thank you so much, John. Another round of applause, please.
Thank you so much.